In the early 1960s, the United States Department of Defense became worried about the spread of communism, especially into the Western Hemisphere. To solve this issue, the United States came up with a shocking plan. This plan, Operation Northwoods. In 1959, communist leader Fidel Castro seized power in Cuba. This led to strained relationships between the United States and Cuba. At this time, the Cold War was raging between the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States was determined to contain communism. So when it appeared just 90 miles off the southern tip of Florida, the United States began drawing up plans to restore democracy in Cuba. In 1961, American President JFK authorized an invasion of Cuba, so long as the invasion force was only made of Cubans who had fled to America. These rebels would be trained by the American military and given American equipment. But JFK was unwilling to risk American lives on the ground in Cuba, so no American troops would participate. This invasion came to be known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. This effort to overthrow the communist Cuban government by force ended up being a disaster and only further worsened relationships between the United States and Cuba, while leaving thousands of Cuban refugees dead. American support for war at this time was fairly low. This would be well illustrated later during the mass protests in opposition to the Vietnam War. Despite this, American generals began drawing up plans to invade Cuba. Unlike the Bay of Pigs invasion, generals now wanted to use American troops to take Cuba and overthrow the communist Castro regime by force. Popular support of the American population would be necessary to produce the manpower, goods, and weaponry necessary to succeed. To gain this support, American military officials drew up a false flag operation. A false flag operation is when a military launches an attack against their own country in order to mobilize the population against a foreign enemy. The most famous example of a false flag operation was the Reichstag fire of 1933. In 1933, the German Parliament building, the Reichstag building, mysteriously burnt down. Adolf Hitler was quick to blame a lone communist for the incident and warned of more terrorist attacks by communists if he wasn't given the power to stop them. Hitler used this fear to convince government officials to allow him to supersede the German Constitution. This allowed Hitler to gain dictatorial power in Germany and bring the Nazi Party to power. It is now a known fact that the fire was not started by a communist, as was originally claimed, but was rather actually started by the Nazi Party. This perfectly exemplifies a false flag operation. Attack your own country, blame someone else, and then use it as an excuse to gain political power and attack your enemies. Operation Northwoods, as it came to be called, was the false flag operation planned by the United States military generals in order to garner popular support for war on Cuba. One of the things planned in this operation was terrorist shootings and bombings in major U.S. cities, especially in Miami and other cities in Florida. These terrorist attacks would be carried out by American agents, but would be blamed on Cuban terrorists and would be done in a way to make it appear as if Cuba was the real culprit. Generals also planned for the sinking of American ships, including in Cuban waters, and done in ways to make it appear Cuba was attacking American ships unprovoked. It was even planned to replace a commercial airplane with a drone, blow it up after it had taken off, and blame Cuban terrorists. American leaders believed this plan would persuade the American population into supporting a fully justified war on Cuba. To achieve this, they were willing to sacrifice the lives of dozens, possibly even hundreds, of innocent American lives. Unfortunately, the plan was vetoed by John F. Kennedy in 1963. JFK was not willing to go to such extremes as Operation Northwoods proposed in order to achieve political goals. Operation Northwoods has now become a rarely mentioned episode of the Cold War, but it is worth remembering. It is important to be skeptical and not just accept the mainstream narrative. If you choose to accept the narrative or what you're told happened, don't be surprised when liars deceive you. Everything is not always as it seems.